For today's review, we are looking at the big bad villain himself, the one responsible for the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that is the Anti-Monitor. Now, who is the Anti-Monitor for those of you who have never heard of this character before? The included data profile card will give us that information as usual. As you can see, there's this phenomenal artwork of just what the character looks like in the comic book art form and showcasing how powerful he is. You have all these superheroes working together to try to stop him, and that still isn't enough. You got Shazam and Superman working to try to free Aquaman and Kid Flash out of his grip. You got Dr. Light here, which I would love to see as a figure if they ever make her into an action figure. Who else is there? There's Power Girl. There's Earth 2 Superman. There's Martian Manhunter. Hawkman. Jay Garrick Flash over here in the corner. The list goes on how many characters are partaking in this battle, and Firestorm down here in the corner. On the back, his real name is Mobius, and it reads, on the distant planet Quaiward, I don't know how you pronounce the name of that, many years ago, a being named Mobius built a sophisticated device called the Mobius chair. Mobius attempted to view the source of the antimatter universe, hoping to discover what sparked its creation. What he found was the anti-life equation, an infamous truth the tyrant Darkseid had spent a lifetime trying to locate. The equation merged with Mobius, transforming him into the immensely powerful Anti-Monitor. The Anti-Monitor became a destroyer, traveling from one universe to the next, consuming worlds. He caused the crisis on Infinite Earths, destroying the multiverse, an event only a few recall. And of course, we talked about a certain character that is also part of this theme of Crisis on Infinite Earths figures that lost his mind because he remembers the events, and it's Psycho Pirate. So there's that. All right, so that was a good little read up on who the Anti-Monitor is for those of you who do not know who the character is. And now let's talk about the figure. So this is a mega figure, and as usual with mega figures, they don't include accessories. Some of them do, like one accessory at most. But Anti-Monitor here has 0 accessories, which I think is kind of disappointing because, you know, they could have given him some sort of effect parts, like energy stuff for his hands. They could have gave him fist hands. I mean, there were some things that they could have included, you know? But the fact that they gave him nothing is kind of sad because it's really hard to do some cool action photos with this figure when he only has this one hand gesture, which doesn't really work. So, you know, I tried with the photos I made for this guy, and I'm pretty sure there's probably some creative way I can make more photos of him in the future with these hand gestures. But again, having accessories would be a great benefit for an action figure, right? And now let's get on to the other topic. So, some people felt that this figure was smaller than he should be. And I can agree where, yeah, he's not, like, tall in any means next to, like, Flashpoint, Cyborg, Atrocitus, or Beast Boy, right? The build figures that we have gotten. He's pretty much almost the same height as them. And I honestly think that he would have benefited if he was the same height as Swamp Thing. And that's where the Megafig line has always been kind of confusing because they call these mega figures because they're supposed to be taller, and they are, than your regular 7-inch scale figure. But the problem is, when you use a character like Anti-Monitor, I think he would have benefited if they made him a bit more bigger in size. Not to the point where it's going to cost you $200, especially if they made him like a 24-inch scale figure like that Legacy Metroplex. Who's gonna buy it, right? Like, that is the question that you have to ask in the end of the day, is that how many people know the Anti-Monitor to the point where they would drop $200 for a size that big for a figure? And also the space that it takes up, you got to take all that into accountability. Like, look, I love this image right here of how big he is, and it would be cool if there was a figure like this big, but at the same time, the cost to making one of these figures this size and also having the room to put this thing in your collection, you got to take that into consideration that it is not something that, you know, you might have room for. So the size he's at, I think, is doable. I think it's fine. I don't have anything against him being like this size and scale. I think it's already good enough, because if he was way too big, he would be way too expensive, and I would not be able to buy this figure at all. So that's something I just want to talk about. Now we can talk about aesthetics, which, when it comes to capturing the source material of what he looks like in the comics, did they do it correctly? And I would like to say that they did, because this is exactly what he looks like. He has blue, silvers, and yellows. And when you look at the design of this figure, you can tell that this was designed at a certain period of time. This was during that era where they love using this kind of like metal design style, which we've seen on characters like Colossus, Cable, right, with his arm, and also other characters in comics that share similar design elements. And I really like the fact that this represents that period, because when you look at these tubes, right, that are all on his body, that's also another good example of that. So I really like the fact that they had this kind of design element at the time. And it makes me wonder, why didn't they just take this and put it in the animated movie? Because that recent adaptation, which I think is not the greatest for Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Anti-Monitor in that movie looks like ass to me. It doesn't even look like anything cool. It looks so generic, and you call it the Anti-Monitor. It's like, I don't see anything in it that represents the Anti-Monitor, except for the fact that it's just wiping out the universe in the movie, right? So when you have a character like this that has a design to it, you gotta make it stand out. And that movie kind of falled really short with the design of the Anti-Monitor, because it looks like a generic giant monster that's humanoid, and there's nothing that represents what I remember the Anti-Monitor to look like. So yeah, not a fan of what they did in that animated movie with his design. All right, let's talk about the face sculpt, because that's another thing that we want to look at. So one thing that I didn't know for the longest time, which I found interesting, is that you would assume that he has eyes, and he does, because these are his eyes, right? You would assume that this is his mouth. These are not his teeth. I don't know what those are, but they are not his teeth. His mouth is like all the way inside. I don't even think it's visible on the figure. So I thought that this was his mouth the whole time, and these were his teeth, and that's just the inside of what his mouth looks like. But apparently, those are not teeth. I don't know what those are, but no matter what, it still creates like a very scary looking character design. Because just imagine if this guy was real, and this is a face that you see walking, you know, on the surface of the earth. That would be horrifying to look at, right? So I think they nailed that design for his head sculpt to capture like how scary he looks in a really good way. And on the back here, you have this like backpack battery thing. I don't know what it is, but that's where all these like tubes are centered from for his torso. And then all the tubes on his arms are like connected to like these armor bits here. So really, really neat design. I think they did a good job with this figure. Now, when it comes to the paint, and this is where I want to bring this up as well, the paint could be done a little bit better in my opinion. So for me, I actually used a metallic marker, and I went back and painted these silver areas with metallic paint. And I don't think the camera is going to capture too much of it, because my quality for my camera is not the greatest. But certain parts of it do look shiny when there's light reflecting on it. So either I didn't use a lot, or I might have to go back and use more just to like make it more shinier. I'm going to do more customizations to the silver areas on the figure, front and back, including his hands, because I really want this metal to just look like it's shiny. Because the base figure color for some of these silvers, they didn't look good. They looked like flat plastic gray. So if you are a customizer and you have this figure, customizing this thing is probably something you would want to do. It's the same thing with the yellows. I think the yellows could be touched up a little bit more where it doesn't look plasticky, because right now, if you look at it, let me just zoom in again. You can tell that this yellow paint makes it look very plasticky, right? So there's a way to make it look less plastic color if you know how to, tune that up. But that's just a suggestion, I guess, for customizing this figure. And that is basically it when it comes to aesthetics. There is not really much else going on with this figure because he's pretty simple in design. And yeah, he's just 3 different colors. So, but still, really cool figure. All right, let's talk about articulation, because that is another thing. So, on my copy, there are certain areas that are still stiff. So I can't really show how they move, unfortunately, because I never heated up those specific areas to loosen them. So we'll start with the arms. The arms are like the most loosest thing on here for me. His arms can only go out that far because this shoulder part hinders the articulation here. So he can shred his arm upward like this, forward, and then go back. But he can't go all the way out unless you kind of like do this. So yeah, he can't go straight up because this piece gets in the way. As for his articulation in the arms, he does have your swivel here with the shoulder, and because these tubes are connected, you always want to be careful with the way you move these arms, because these tubes are just glued into those sockets and it could break if you are not careful with it. So they do move. They do double articulate. Let me see if I can get it to move on this side. There we go. So yeah, there it is right there. And for his hands, they do swivel, and there is articulation there with the ball joint. As for his head sculpt, you're not going to get much movement with his head. Like, you can turn his head a little bit, right? Like, you can see how I'm turning it, but his mouth gets blocked. What I keep calling the mouth gets blocked by this front piece right here. He can't really look up too much. He can't really look down too much because it's just the way that they sculpted the area where his head is resting that limits his head mobility. But he can turn his head. So if you want to turn his head like this way, you can, but it's just going to look weird. So do keep that in mind. And for his torso, let's reset that first. As for his torso, there is movement up here. It's not bad. You can't really crunch forward too much, unfortunately. And you can't really lean back too much, so there's that limitation. And then his waist area down here, it does move, but again, it's really tight on my copy, so I'm not really going to get much movement there unless I heat it up. As for his legs, they do kick out, I guess, okay, right? It's because this piece right here, even though it feels like soft PVC, there is something underneath it that they didn't carve out enough room for the legs to kick out too much. So, but it's still better than steel, all right? At least he can kick his legs out compared to steel, where he can't even kick anything out. Can the anti-monitor do the splits? Not exactly, but he can still at least spread out his legs a little bit, so there's that. And what's nice is that on my copy, the legs are looser, so he also has upper thigh swivel up here, which sometimes isn't even present on the figure. As for his articulation with the legs, again, these areas are super tight on my copy, but they do double articulate. If you heat them up, just be careful on how you move them. And his feet down here, they do move, they do swivel. Oh, hold up. There we go. And there is articulation. So, simple articulation as usual with most Mcfarlane figures. And now, we got to compare him to some other figures in the whole Crisis thing. And let's bring them in after I put them in the back. So, of course, you got the monitor, which we looked at in the last video. You got to go with the anti-monitor, right? So, here he is with the anti-monitor. So, that's pretty cool. You can put them together. And, of course, we looked at Spectre, another character that could fit in with this little Crisis on Infinite Earth shelf. You got Psycho Pirate, who betrayed the Monitor and sided with the Anti-Monitor. And because they're not going to fit into frame, I'm going to move them out. Then you got, Kid Flash right here, who is also part of the story, which is really cool. Then you got the Earth 2 Superman, which is also part of the story. And, of course, last but not least, you have Firestorm. And, yeah, you can have a shelf going with these figures. And if you want to keep them all in this whole Crisis on Infinite Earths corner, you can do that. And it works. And, of course, let's not forget Psycho Pirate. So, I think it's cool. I would like to see more characters from this comic be turned into figure form. Whether it's like an Earth 2 version of like a superhero character we recognize. Because recently they did make that, I think it was the Earth 2 Robin. That was also from the Crisis on Infinite Earth story. So that's just another example of what kind of characters they can probably make in whatever version they're from. And yeah, I really love that these figures exist. It's fun to look back at them. And look, I said what I had to say about that build wave, before today's last review for this whole theme. And that build wave is still egregious. And it's something that I hope they don't do. And I will still stay on that opinion that I think Anti-Monitor should have been the build figure for something, right? In this whole theme. Instead of, Monitor here. And it's what it is. It's just my opinion in the end of the day. And if you got different opinions, that's cool. I respect it. And yeah, that is the Anti-Monitor. I hope today's review was informative. And if you found it informative, do give this video a like. And if you want to subscribe to my channel to see more action figure content and whatever else I do on this channel, do subscribe. You don't have to. In the end of the day, I make these videos for fun. And with that said, take care, and I will see you in the next video.